are holding on Daf Gimel Amud Aleph. We turned the page. We're up to 3A. But let's just go over for a few minutes what we covered yesterday, especially because it was becoming a little confusing. We seem to have three Rebbe Yeshuas. There was a Rebbe Yeshua of a Mishnah. There's a Rebbe Yeshua in the Braisa. And then there was a Rebbe Yehuda in the name of Rebbe Yeshua. So that was three different views, which two of them seemingly are the same rabbi. It's just two opinions of what Rabbi Yeshua. Rebbe Yeshua Stam refers to Rebbe Yeshua ben Hananya. The regular Rebbe Yeshua is referring to Rebbe Yeshua ben Hananya. And the Gemara will soon tell us who is the Rebbe Yeshua that Rebbe Yehuda was quoting. That's a different Rebbe Yeshua. It's going to be Rebbe Yeshua ben Beseira. So we'll soon see about that. But basically, these are two opinions. I'm sorry, two people with three opinions. And the way that works is because there's two ways there are two opinions as to what that rabbi held. So it ends up being two rabbis with three opinions. So let's go over this and make it very clear, especially also because there's a lot that the rabbis don't say, like they don't tell us what tefillah, what specific prayer are they referring to. So and there are differences of opinion among the commentaries even as to what prayer within that day. In other words, the rabbis are arguing, what day do you start Mashiv Haruach U'Merda Geshem? What day do you start mentioning rain? But in the rabbis' views, we have to try to figure out what is their specific view. What part of the day do you start saying it? Do you start saying it at Ma'ariv, or do you start reciting it earlier? So the one opinion that we do have clear is Rabbi Eliezer, because Rabbi Eliezer says he learns it from Lulav. In Lulav, you only start by day. So we think we have it pretty clear that Rabbi Eliezer is referring to Shachris. As much as we think it's clear, even Rabbi Eliezer is not so clear because there are questions on that. How could you say that you start saying Mashiv Haruach U'Merda Geshem and Shachris if you're not allowed to start until the Chazan announces it? And the Chazan can't announce it, or the Gabbai can't announce it in Shachris because you're not allowed to talk then. So even in Rabbi Eliezer, it's not so simple to say that Rabbi Eliezer means Shachris, and therefore there's room to say that maybe he means Musaf. So there's question in Rabbi Eliezer's view. So let's go over basically all the views now. So we have Rabbi Eliezer where we're not sure. He definitely learns the source of Mashiv Haruach U'Merda Geshem, mentioning it. He learns from Lulav, that just like Lulav is requesting, is an awake, it's a appeasement and a request from Hashem for rain. So the mitzvah of Lulav, when you shake the Lulav is sort of awakening in Hashem that we need rain. So the mention of rain in the davening is symbolic, is similar, is connected to the Lulav. And the Lulav you start by the first day of Sukkot. Rabbi Eliezer says you also do the Mashiv Haruach U'Merda Geshem mentioned the first day of Sukkot, and we just mentioned that that's either Shachris prayer or Musaf prayer. If it's Shachris prayer, the way to explain how do you announce it if you're not allowed to interrupt, well, that view holds that you are allowed to interrupt. If it's l'tzairach tefillah, if it's in order for the davening, you would be allowed to interrupt the davening, and therefore the Gabbai could announce, according to Rabbi Eliezer, he would be allowed to announce Mashiv Haruach U'Merda Geshem in between the bracha of Gal Yisrael and davening, because this is called Tzairach HaTefillah. It's called a need for davening. Therefore, you're allowed to interrupt. Normally, you're not allowed to talk in the middle of davening. You can't interrupt. And certain places are prohibited to interrupt. But this would be allowed according to one view, and that would follow the view that Rabbi Eliezer holds Shachris, the morning prayer, is when you start saying Mashav Baruch Bar Geshem. The other view would hold that maybe it's Musaf, that in Musaf is when you would start saying Mashav Baruch Umayrid Geshem. Now, the next opinion from our Mishnah was Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua said the last day of Sukkot, which meant Shmini Atzeres. Again, we have to figure out what part of the day does he start. So the understanding is that Rabbi Yeshua in our Mishnahs, Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, he holds from the Shachris. Again, it's the same the same discussion, the same question. I'm going to be stuck figuring out the issue of how could he do it at Shachris, but that's the understanding that Rabbi Yeshua must hold, that you start at Shachris on the last day of Sukkot, and that would be Shmini Atzeres. He would start saying Mashav Baruch Bar Geshem, and seemingly at the Shachris prayer. Then we had the Brisa. Now the Brisa says that Rabbi Yoshua argues on Rabbi Eliezer, and he says that when you put down the lulav, that's when you start saying Mashav Baruch Bar Geshem. When is that you put down the lulav? So some understand that to mean the last day that you use the lulav is Hoshana Rabbah, the sixth day of Sukkot. I'm sorry, the seventh day of Sukkot, Hoshana Rabbah. So some want to learn that that's what Rabbi Yeshua means. The seventh day is when you put down the lulav. Start saying on the seventh day, you could start saying the Mashav Baruch Umayrid Geshem prayer. Now it sounds that's different than our Mishnah. Our Mishnah understood the last day, meaning Shmini Atzeres. So Rabbi Yeshua of the Brisa is arguing on Rabbi Yeshua of the Mishnah, and Rabbi Yeshua of the Brisa says it's based on not the last day of Sukkot, but it's based on when you put down the lulav. You put down the lulav on Hoshana Rabbah, so that would be the seventh day of Sukkot. So that's when you start saying Mashav Baruch Umayrid Geshem. And it would be basically two opinions in the view of Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya. Now, the more common view is that Rabbi Yeshua holds he holds similar to our Mishnah, which our Mishnah said it's Shmini Atzeres. The same Rabbi Yeshua of the Brisa also Shmini Atzeres. But he does argue, but the view in the Brisa is different than the Mishnah. The Mishnah said you would start on Shachris. The Brisa says you would start at Ma'ariv. So Shmini Atzeres Ma'ariv, you'd start saying Mashav Baruch Umayrid Geshem. That would be the view of Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya in the Brisa. When you put down the lulav, when you put it down, right at the end of Hoshana Rabbah, and you start right afterwards, Ma'ariv, you would start the Mashav Baruch Umayrid Geshem. So that would be Rabbi Yeshua's view. Then we have the view of Rebbe. And Rebbe basically says that you never request or mention rain when you're not, you can't mention rain if it's not the time for rain, and if you stop, you can't do it all year round. You can't mention rain all year round, like Rabbi Eliezer said. And when you stop for asking, that's when you have to stop for mentioning. Now, what that means is if you stop asking for rain, which means right before Pesach, because the last Shemona Esrei where you ask for rain is on Erev Pesach. So that's where you would start, you would stop mentioning rain as well. Now, when would that be? That would also be that Shemona Esrei, which is on Erev Pesach, which means not like our Mishnah or our Brisa would say Musaf time is when you make a change, but Rebbe would say that you stop saying it. Again, he's talking about stopping. You would stop saying it. You can't say it in the summer. And he's also saying that you can't say it during Sukkot, it's not a time of rain. But he's also arguing on the main view that Musaf is a time of changing. On the accepted view, Rebbe is saying, no, you stop at the Shemona Esrei. At Ma'ariv, you would stop mentioning. And now we have Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says you mention the rain on the second day of Sukkot. Rabbi Akiva says on the sixth day of Sukkot. And Rabbi Yehuda, in the name of Rabbi Yoshua, this is that view that I was mentioning, that there's another Rabbi Yoshua, a third Rabbi Yoshua. And this Rabbi Yoshua, the Gemara is going to tell us it's Rabbi Yoshua ben Beseira, not Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. This is another son of ben Beseira called Rabbi Yoshua ben Beseira. It's a different Rabbi Yoshua. He says that it goes by the person who davens Musaf, and this is Rabbi Yehuda.
So he's Yehuda's brother?
So it seems he's Rabbi Yehuda's brother. They're both children of ben Beseira. Okay, so that's basically the views. We did talk a little about the argument, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua. We mentioned that Rabbi Yoshua says every day is a time for Tchias HaMesim, because Rabbi Yoshua says it's based on Tshuva. Rabbi Eliezer seems that there's a set time for Geula, and therefore you can't just Rabbi Eliezer says there's a set time for Geula, and yet you mentioned Tchias HaMesim all year round. So the same thing is the mentioning of rain, even though it's not the time for it, you could still mention it. You can mention it all year round. You're obligated to mention it from the beginning of Sukkot. And then the Gemara mentioned the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, the second day of Sukkot, and it's based on the hint. And this is an important part of the of yesterday's Amud, yesterday's learning, was that there's a hint for the pouring of the water in the verses where there's an extra mem, an extra yud, and an extra mem. That basically teaches us that you have to do a pouring of water during Sukkot, which is like a whole new ceremony that wasn't done all year round. They would do a ceremony like a sacrifice of water almost. They would pour water on the altar, and there were certain pipes that they would pour it into, and just like they would pour wine. So on Sukkot they would also pour water. It didn't change the wine. The wine was also poured, but in addition to the wine, they also poured water. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira mentions that the hint for it is based on what it says on the second day of Sukkot. So he basically starts that mentioning of the rain based on the pouring, mentioning the rain based on the pouring of the water, and that would be on the second day of Sukkot. He would start mentioning rain. Again, we're praising Hashem for the rain, and we're basing it either on lulav or basing it either on the pouring of the water on the altar. But one of those customs or traditions, I should say, one of those traditions is the source of rain. The reason is, and this is what it all boils down to, is what are we really doing on Sukkot by pouring water and by shaking the lulav and esrog? What we're really doing, both of those ceremonies are awakening in Hashem the fact that the Jewish people need rain. That's what it's basically doing. So it makes sense to mention rain at the same time that we are doing the act that's awakening Hashem to bring rain. So if the act of lulav or the act of Nisuch HaMayim, these are acts that are sort of awakening Hashem to bring rain. So it does makes some sense to to also mention rain. At least Rabbi Eliezer holds that. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira holds that. Some of the other rabbis as well hold that. Rabbi Yeshua doesn't seem to connect it to these. And the reason Rabbi Yeshua would follow a different logic. He would say, well, rain is bad on Sukkot because it's going to cause you to leave the sukkah. That's a siman klala. It's a bad omen. It's an omen of curse. And Rabbi Yeshua would say that it's true you do shake the lulav on Sukkot. It's true you do pour the water on Sukkot, but don't mention rain on Sukkot. What's the difference? The doing the act of shaking the lulav and pouring the water is awakening in Hashem the fact that we need rain. So why should you mention rain? What's so bad? If it's a bad sign, maybe don't shake the lulav on Sukkot and don't pour the water. No, Rabbi Yeshua, no. That you have to do. You have to shake the lulav and you have to pour the water. But Rabbi Yeshua says when you say it, it has a much bigger impact. Doing the action, that's, it's bringing up the concept. We're judged on rain, so it's bringing up the concept to Hashem about rain. But if you mention it, then it actually is going to have some type of an effect. So it really shows us a very interesting idea that sometimes words are more powerful than actions. There's a very interesting element here that we're seeing in this Gemara. Again, it's not really developed by the commentaries. I'm just sharing it with you what we see here. Just think about it practically. We're dealing with Rabbi Yeshua's view, and Rabbi Yeshua's view, and I should say also Rabbi Yehuda's view. Rabbi Yehuda also follows the last day of Sukkot, Shmini Atzeres, and this is the custom. This is the tradition. So we're following the halacha, and the halacha is that you start saying Mashav Haruach on the last day of Sukkot. Now, doesn't that contradict the fact that we are shaking the lulav, which is an awakening of rain? Shaking the lulav, that awakens Hashem for like the lulav and esrog, all those four species, they need a lot of rain. So when we shake it, what we're doing is mentioning to Hashem, you see what I'm shaking? This mitzvah, it grows on rain. It grows on rainwater. So it's sort of awakening this concept of rain to Hashem. And we're pouring water on the altar, which water on the altar is also an awakening, so to speak, of rain. It's mentioning to Hashem, water, we're giving you water, we're pouring water on the altar. And yet, mentioning the rain, that we don't do till after. That we wait, according to Rabbi Yeshua. Taanis, tractate Taanis, Mark. Ruven.
What page?
You got it? Page, we're starting on 3a, but we're just discussing yesterday's, we're thinking about yesterday's Gemara out loud. So this is an idea that we see here, that when you mention it, that's a problem. It's going to cause Hashem to actually rain now. It's going to actually cause rain to happen now. But if it's just the action of the lulav, shaking the lulav and estrog, or the pouring the water, that's not really making Hashem do it now. It seems like when you verbalize it, it actually it could cause Hashem to bring the rain now. And what it reminds me of is in the Chumash, where it talks about if you heard a orphan and he cries to me, Ki Yitzchok Eli v'shamati ki chanunoni, I'm going to hear his cry because I am merciful. So the understanding of Rashi brings, it must be from a Gemara, that even if he doesn't cry, I'm going to hear his cry. I'm gonna help him. But when he cries, or Ki Yitzchok Eli, he's going to cry to me. When he cries, it makes me, so to speak, listen to him faster, or immediately help him. So almost like our words have a bigger impact. It tells us the power of words, even to Hashem, that our prayer has an impact when we verbalize it. Mashiv Haruach U'Mered Geshem will cause it to rain during Sukkot. Don't do it. Yes, Ben.
I wanted to say, but they say that you can say Mashiva Ruach Umorina Geshem all year round, or you can
That's
mention
Rabbi Eliezer.
Geshem. Yeah,
That's the other views.
right.
These are
So
different views.
if that's
I'm following.
true, but if that's true, wouldn't it rain every time you mention it?
No, so again, you're following Rabbi Eliezer's view, who says that I'm not telling you to ask for it. His view is I'm only saying mention it. You can mention Tchias HaMesim even though it's not the appropriate time for Tchias HaMesim all year round. There's a specific time when Tchias HaMesim will happen,
And it's not going to bring it Tchias HaMesim,
and it's
right?
not going to bring it because you can't, because you're just mentioning it. You're mentioning the greatness of Hashem. That's Rabbi Eliezer's view. Rabbi Yeshua argues. He says, no, if you mention it, it might have some type of impact. So according to Rabbi Yeshua, you don't mention it, but you do shake the lulav and esrog. It's a mitzvah. You have to. You do pour the water. It's a hint in the Torah, which is or halach l'meishu b'sinai, right? It's a teaching. You have to pour the water on the altar. These also awaken the concept of rain, but you can't say it. What's the difference? It's an interesting thing you see here. That saying it will have more of an impact than doing the action. That's what it seems like. Yes, Mordechai.
Yeah, there's a joke about a couple who's making a fuss over a child, and a few days beforehand, they noticed that there was one particular neighbor that they had forgotten to send an invitation to. So they call up the neighbor and say, due to an oversight, we didn't send you an invitation. Please come. And the neighbor says, it won't help. I already prayed for rain.
Cute. All right. Anyway, so we are. So we have the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, who said the sixth day, and he learned it from the word unesacheha. Now this is a little technical here. We're going into the wording of the Torah reading, which we read on Sukkot. The Torah reading on Sukkot, on the one hand, is a very easy Torah reading because it's just repetitious. It says on the first day you bring this sacrifice, and then on the second day you also bring these sacrifices. The only thing that changes is the number of oxen, bulls, that they change. The number of bulls goes down from 13 to 12 to 11 to 10, 9, 8, 7. So it basically just goes down one number, but everything else is basically the same. And the thing is, so it seems very smooth and easy. And then it's like a curveball. You have like 3 words in different days that like knock you off track, because instead of saying v'niska, one place it says unesacheha. So if the balkoire, the reader, is not looking well or thinking, he could easily make a mistake over there, because there's this word that sends you a curveball, and instead of v'niska, it's unesacheha. There's another word in the second day. It says v'nis kehem. It should have said v'niska. And on the sixth day, it says, that's the one I said, unesacheha. And on the seventh day, it says, I'm sorry, what did you say?
Unsachav. You have the third version.
Unsacha.
What sachav? One of them ends with a yud vav.
Unesacheha. One is v'nis kehem, unesacheha, and temishpatam.
Okay.
Temishpatam. So we have these 3 curveballs for the balkoire. So it makes him, be careful and prepare, even though he thinks he knows it. What?
I've tripped over that.
So in any event, now you're going to understand why. Why did Hashem do this? Why did Hashem make these little changes? And when he dictated exactly every letter to Moshe Rabbeinu, why did he want the Torah to say these, to make these 3 little changes? The reason is because he wanted to hint to us that he wants us to bring an additional libation of water. So every day we would bring the libation of wine, the sacrifice, the daily sacrifice had a libation of wine. In addition to that, on Sukkot, you would also bring a libation of water. And that is hinted to from these three letters that it messes us up. There's an extra mem, an extra yud, and an extra mem. What does that spell? Mayim, water. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says that's the hint to water. And that's when, when it starts, that hint starts on the second day of Sukkot. The first letter that tricks us is on the second day of Sukkot. So you know what? That's the day you start doing the Nisuch HaMayim, and that's the day you start doing the Mashiv HaRuach U'Mered HaGeshem. You start saying it. You start pouring the water, then you start saying it. Then that's Rabbi Yehuda's view.
Rabbi.
Yes. Yes.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to ask you, what's the English translation of those three words?
So that's what I was about to say. Thank you. So the first one is that they would it's saying they would bring these sacrifices for Sukkot. Besides for the daily sacrifice, it's meal offering and their libations. So it uses a plural, their libations. Now, on the second day, keep in mind, it says their libations. So it implies like plural sacrifices, plural libations, that there's multiple sacrifices, multiple libations. It doesn't exactly tell you on the second day that there's one sacrifice with two libations. It says there's multiple sacrifices with libations, which is plural. So it's not 100% clear proof that you need to bring an additional libation for one sacrifice, the daily sacrifice. That's the second day. But on the sixth day, it does make it more clear. Because on the sixth day, it says, Unisocheha, and its libations. If it says their libations, that's a plural amount of sacrifices and a plural amount of libations. But if it says its libations, it's one sacrifice, and libations plural means that you're going to have two libations for one sacrifice. That's on the sixth day, the word. And then on the seventh day, it says kimish patam. It just says their libation. Let me look at the verse again. I don't want to make a mistake. It says on the seventh day, umin chasam, in their meal offering and their libations for the parim, for the bulls, for the rams, for the sheep, b'misparam kimishpatam, according to their number, as was given as a statute.
The rules.
Kimishpatam, as their rules, as their statutes, as their rules. So that's the extra word in the seventh one. So what comes out from here is Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says you have an extra mem yud mem. Sure. Let me just mute everyone here. So you have an extra mem yud mem. So you end up with a hint for water, and it starts on the second day, and therefore he would follow that the mentioning of the rain would be also on the second day. Now, the second day of Sukkot. Rabbi Akiva says, no, I'm not satisfied with that. Where do you really find the additional libation? It's on the sixth day. As I mentioned to you, the sixth day is where you have, it says, one sacrifice with two libations. That's where you see that there's an extra libation, and that extra libation would be a libation of water. So when is that? On the sixth day? So therefore, it would make sense to start mentioning rain on the sixth day. This is Rabbi Akiva. Now the Gemara asks, maybe Rabbi Akiva should just do an extra wine libation. How does he know that you do a water libation? Maybe it's two libations of wine. And on this, the Gemara answers that he also agrees that there is a hint to the water libations, which is following Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira's point, but he doesn't emphasize the the actual extra libation, since the Torah doesn't emphasize it until the sixth day, the extra libation, it just hints to water, but it emphasizes the extra libation on the sixth day. So therefore, he says that's the day that you really emphasize the extra libation, and that is a water libation, and that's on the sixth day, and that's when you would start. Saying Mashiv Haruach. Okay. Now, in other words, that's the main drasha. That's the main teaching. Yes, Ruben.
Well, actually, the reason for all this is so the people could travel back home.
So that's different. That's another story. The thing about traveling back home is a problem because it did take them a while to get back home, and they didn't even leave yet, and we're already mentioning rain on the 8th day of Sukkot, Shmini Atzeres. And this is the real day of rejoicing. Shmini Atzeres is they still haven't left yet. They're leaving right after Shmini Atzeres to head back home, and we're already mentioning rain. So that's the point that you're making is seemingly a good point according to the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua, where you shouldn't where it's gonna cause rain to come. You shouldn't mention it when it's not a good time. Now, Rabbi Yeshua says you don't mention it on Sukkot because it's a siman klala, it's a curse. In other words, it's like Hashem doesn't want your service. If it rains afterwards, maybe you could say we're not asking for rain, but we mention it. And mentioning could have some type of an effect, but it's not a curse. It actually shows our commitment to Hashem. So if it rains, it's not like Hashem throwing water in our face and he doesn't want us to serve him. He let us serve him. We served him. We were there for 7-8 days. And now we're leaving, and Hashem is giving us rain. So it's not exactly the same type of a curse that would happen on Sukkot, where Hashem is, the Gemara, the Mishnah gave an example in Tractate Sukkah, where it's like the master pours the pitcher of water back in your face. You try to serve him, and he pours it back in your face. So if it would rain after Sukkot, it's not exactly Hashem saying, I don't want you to serve me, because we served him already and he accepted it. You know what I mean? So it's not exactly the same level of a curse when it rains after Sukkot as if it rains during Sukkot. You got that? Okay, yes, Yehuda. Yehuda.
Yeah. What if it rains after Sukkot, Mr. Leave?
You're breaking up. I didn't hear you. I don't know if it was just me or did anyone hear Yehuda?
No, you broke up.
Okay, say it again, Yehuda.
If it rains after Sukkot, isn't that Hashem saying that he doesn't want us to leave?
He doesn't want us to leave. Okay. Uh-huh.
Instead of being
good line.
A curse, it's a blessing.
So if it rains right after Sukkot, right? Immediately, right before we leave. Yeah, that's a good line. Okay. Hashem doesn't want us to leave. Okay.
Rabbi?
Yes, Moshe.
Simon Klala would be a bad simon, but what I'm trying to say is that during the tefillah, the beginning part is when there's prayers. Is it the curse is on the prayers, on the tefillah, or is it on the actual participation in the sukkah?
No, it's if it rains when you're leaving the sukkah. That's when it applies. If you're in the sukkah and it rains and you leave, that's like Hashem pouring the pitcher of water in your face and saying, I don't want you to serve me.
I see. But then you're saying that the tefillah is not as important as the being in the sukkah?
You're losing me there. The tefillah is not as important. It's the tefillah. All he's saying is you wouldn't want to mention. Rabbi Yeshua says you don't want to mention rain, praising Hashem for rain when it's really not a good time for rain and it's like a time of curse. So you don't mention it then. But why is it a time of curse? And that has to do with sitting in the sukkah. And if it rains, then that makes it a time of a curse if it would rain, because Hashem is like pouring water in your face.
I see.
Pitcher. pouring back the picture. Okay, so so we just did Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, Rabbi Akiva, and now we are up to the Brisa of Reb Nassan. So let me tell you where we are. We are on the third line on page 3a. So 3a in the third line of the Gemara, and if you were in the art scroll, I'll tell you in a second. Let me open up the art scroll here. 3a1, and it's the third paragraph. The third paragraph in the 3a1. Okay, Tanya, we learned in a brisa. Rabbi Nassan says, "V'kodesh haseich nesech shecher lashem." It says in the Torah, you should pour on the holy. V'kodesh means on the holy mizbeach. Pour haseich nesech. It uses a double term for pouring a libation. Shecher laHashem, wine to Hashem. Now, what does this mean? It means pour the wine libation, right? But it does say a double term, haseich nesech. So the Gemara says, Bishnei nisuchin hakosav v'daber. It says about two libations. One is the libation of water, and one is the libation of wine. And that's how you know that there is an additional libation called a water libation. Now, what's interesting here is that this verse is about the daily sacrifice. Now, the daily sacrifice was not only on Sukkot. The daily sacrifice called the Karban Tamid. This was a daily burnt offering, Karban Oila, Karban Tamid. This daily sacrifice was every day of the year. Now, Rabbi Nassan is finding an extra word in it to hint to the water libation, which only applied to Sukkot. So it's interesting that he's finding, he's finding the source in the general command of the daily sacrifice, and somehow he's going to limit it to the only the days of Sukkot, even though the hint is really in the general portion of the daily libation. So it seems like a little surprising that he's finding this hint there, even though really it's not going to be. It's not going to be poured every day of the year. It's only going to be poured on Sukkot. Now, the Gemara asked the typical question, how do you know that it's a water libation? Maybe it's a additional wine libation. Maybe you do two wines, one sweet wine, one dry wine. No. In those days, they didn't have sweet wine. That's an innovation of Manischewitz or Shapiro's came up with the sweet wine. In those days, in fact, according to halacha, I don't think you're allowed to add any sweetness to the wine. Otherwise, it's not kosher for the altar. But they used the Gemara asked, how do you know it's wine and water? Maybe it's two wine libations. Maybe both are wine libations. Im Kain, the Gemara says, if so, that they're going to be two wine libations. Lichtov kra, let the verse use a double language, but at least pick the same word. Oy haseich haseich, haseich or naseich nesech nesech nesech. It should use the same word. Why do you switch the actual word to haseich nesech? My haseich nesech shaman mina. We learn from here because you switch it a little. Chad demaya v'chad dechamra. We learn that one has to be wine and one has to be water. Okay, now the Gemara says
the Karban Tamid also had Nesechem, right?
This is about the Karban Tamid.
So the Karban Tamid every day was 1 year-old lamb and a wine libation that went with it, and a mincha.
Mincha.
So they also made crackers or whatever, the oil with the flour. That was the component of the Tamid. 3 things.
Right.
Okay, good. Morning and afternoon, every day.
Morning and afternoon, every day.
Rabbi,
What?
could have been red wine and white wine?
I'm not sure. Did they use white wine on the mizbeach? I don't know. I'm not. I guess we could look it up. I could take a look. I don't know offhand. It's it's funny. There's an area of Torah that most people don't learn because it's not so practical. And you know what that area is? Sacrifices. There's like the laws of sacrifices are like very we study it in Rambam, of course, but it's you go through it, but it's so not it hasn't been, unfortunately, it hasn't been practiced.
It's getting there. It's getting there.
Getting there.
Yeah, very soon.
So but it's like it's like an area that it's hard, you got to look around to find someone who knows it inside out, the laws of sacrifices. It's it's not like a typical thing.
We say it every morning in chakras.
Not the whole laws. You say on the 2 pages.
We even skip those.
A lot of people skip it, yeah. But you're right. You do get a few good ideas from those, like a little about the carbon the carbon taida, the carbon shlamim, the carbon asham, carbon chatas, the carbon oila. Right? You learn carbon pesach.
You learn the names and you learn the numbers. But
you know a few things, right? You know a few things. Who's allowed to eat it? How long you can eat it for? So you have a few small details. But let me tell you, there's a whole set of tractates that are
the procedure.
That there's a whole. It's quite a study. Okay, so in any event, coming back to the Gemara now, to answer Ruvain's question, the conclusion is that they only did 1 libation of wine. So they didn't do 2 libations. It's only a question of the Gemara. But the question that you're asking is, maybe the Gemara's question was we should have 1 red and 1 white. But that's only in the question. I'm just clarifying that the answer of the Gemara is that they didn't have 2 types of wines. They only had 1 wine libation. But in the question, you could have your, you could give you a little insight over there. Okay, so we're now gonna bring another a Mishnah, and in this Mishnah, we're gonna try to figure out whose opinion does this Mishnah follow. So I went over many views in the beginning of this class, and I took up a lot of the class, a good chunk of the class, going over the views. And now you're going to see it's going to come in handy, because now we're going to try to fit this Mishnah with one of those views. So Ella Haditnan. But this that we learned in a Mishnah at the end of Tractate Sukkah, Nisoch Hamayim Kol Shiva. They would pour a water libation for 7 days. All 7 days they did the water libation. Mani, who does this go like? Whose opinion is this? Who held that they did a water libation all 7 days? Now, the Gemara is going to go through many of the names. Rabbi Yoshua, if it's the view of Rabbi Yoshua that Rabbi Yoshua says you do the Mashiv Haruach U'Merda Geshem, you would start on the 8th day Shmini Atzeres. So if it follows Rabbi Yoshua, so how many days would you pour the water libation? Only 1. Name Echad Yom. It should say that the water libation was only 1 day. And the Gemara is assuming that possibly Rabbi Yeshua's basis for his view is based on the water libation. And if he says to mention the rain on the 8th day of Sukkot, that would mean that if he learns it from the water libation, that would mean that you pour the water libation on the 8th day of Sukkot. Now, how many more days of Sukkot are there after the 8th day of Sukkot? None. In Israel, there's no more days than the 8th day. So if you start on the 8th day of Sukkot pouring the wine libation, you end on the 8th day of Sukkot pouring the wine libation. You only have 1 day of wine libation, according to Rabbi Yoshua, if this is correct, that Rabbi Yoshua bases his teaching on the wine libation. It would basically mean you pour one water libation on Sukkot 1 day will be the 8th day. So that does not fit with the Mishnah in Sukkah that says you pour water 7 days. It won't fit with Rabbi Yoshua. Now, Rabbi Akiva, if it follows Rabbi Akiva, let's remember, what was Rabbi Akiva's view? Rabbi Akiva says, when do you mention the rain? On the 6th day of Sukkot. How many days would you then pour the water libation?
2.
2, the 6th and the 7th, it would make sense. Rabbi Akiva, Treyayim, it would be 2 days, because it would make sense not to pour the water libation on Shmini Atzeres. That would be surprising. So we would do it on the 6th day and the 7th day and then stop. It would end on the 7th day, the water libation. You pour 2 water libations on the 6th day and the 7th day. That would be Rabbi Akiva's view. That can't fit the Mishnah in Sukkah that says you pour the water libation 7 days. Rabbi Akiva would say 2 days. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, if we follow Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, when did Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira say to start mentioning Mashiv Haruach Umered HaGeshem? He says start on the 2nd day, if you remember correctly. He says on the 2nd day because that's when you have the hint to the water libation where the verse gives you a curveball and tells you start water. It gives you a hint, mayim, an extra mem, an extra yud, an extra mem. When does it start? On the 2nd day of Sukkot. So according to Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, how many days would you pour the water libation? You would pour the 2nd day, the 3rd day, the 4th day, the 5th day, the 6th day, and the 7th day. How many days is that? 6 days, according to Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, shita yoimi. The 6 days that you would pour it, not like the Mishnah says 7 days. So who does the Mishnah go like? Now you may ask, is there a problem to find an opinion who the Mishnah goes like? Let it go like Rabbi Eliezer, because Rabbi Eliezer says, when do you mention Mashiv Haruach Umered HaGeshem? On the first day of Sukkot. If you mention it on the 1st day of Sukkot, then how many days do you pour the libation? 7 days. Wouldn't that be perfect? Why can't the Gemara just say Rabbi Eliezer? The Gemara should just say Rabbi Eliezer. Come on, what's the big deal over here? You're jumping to Rabbi Akiva, who starts on the 6th. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, he starts on the 2nd day. The Rabbi Yoshua, just do Rabbi Eliezer. Come on, what's the big deal? Rabbi Eliezer, right? He said it was 7 days. What do you think? Why doesn't it say Rabbi Eliezer? Rabbi Eliezer would be the obvious one. He starts on the 1st day of Sukkot. You have 7 full days that you have to do a water. You do a water libation on each day. You got 7 days. You start on the 1st day of Sukkot. You're mentioning the water. The answer is that we've concluded earlier in the Gemara. We already concluded that Rabbi Eliezer does not learn the mention of rain from the water libation. He learns the mention of rain from the lulav. So he doesn't follow this whole discussion. We don't know what he holds about the water libation. So the Gemara can't say Rabbi Eliezer because we don't have any clue when he would start the water libation and when he would end it. We don't know. So the Gemara doesn't mention Rabbi Eliezer because Rabbi Eliezer was following the other way of thinking, that you base mentioning rain on lulav. So he didn't discuss his opinion about mentioning rain, doesn't tell us anything about pouring water libations. His opinion tells us something about lulav, maybe, but it doesn't tell us anything about the water libation. So the Gemara now comes up with an answer. It says, Le'olam Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. Again, we're still on 3A1. We're on the second column, if you have the art scroll. Second column of 3A1. In the new paragraph, Le'olam Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. Really, it follows Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. How could it follow Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira? He says you start on the second day, you end up with only 6 days of pouring water libations. Usvirale Rabbi Yehuda de Masnisen, he follows Rabbi Yehuda of the following Mishnah, the Tanan that we learned in a Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda says, Belug hayamanasech kol shmeina. Rabbi Yehuda says, you don't stop at the end of Sukkot. You do it also on Shmini Atzeres, you pour water. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says, I start on the second day of Sukkot. Rabbi Yehuda of the Mishnah that we just read, that Mishnah also in Sukkah, he says, you do 8 days of pouring water libations. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira follows one part of his view. He says, I don't agree with you when to start, but I agree with you when to finish. I agree with you to add an extra day onto Sukkot called Shmini Atzeres and pour water on Shmini Atzeres. It's not exactly Sukkot, but pour water on Shmini Atzeres. And that I agree with. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, who starts on the second day, could come up with 7 days of pouring water libations if he holds like the other Rabbi Yehuda, who says that you pour water on the 8th day, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira will add his 6 days of Sukkot with the additional day, Shmini Atzeres, altogether 6 plus 1 equals 7. You have 7 days of water libation. And that would fit with that Mishnah that we could not find the author of. Now we have found an author. The author is Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, and Rabbi Yehuda follows this view of the other Mishnah in Sukkah that says that you pour water on the 8th day of Shmini Atzeres. Umapik Rishon, except that Rabbi Yehuda, he excludes the first day, but Uma'ayel Shmini, but he does add the 8th day like Rabbi Yehuda of that Mishnah, and therefore he altogether adds up to 7 days of water libation, and that fits the Mishnah that we were trying to figure out how we could come up with some opinion of 7 days. The Gemara asks, Sumaishna Rishon Deloy, why doesn't he include the first day of Sukkot? Because there's no hint to water libation. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, he says, I start the second day. You know why I start the second day? Because there's no hint to it on the first day. There's a hint to the water libation on the second day. So that's why he starts the water libation on the second day. So the Gemara says, why doesn't he do it on the first day? The Chira Miza Mayim, when does it hint about a water libation? B'sheni hu deramis. It's hinted to on the second day. The Gemara asks, Shmini Nami. You could say that the 8th day, it doesn't say anything about water. So if he doesn't want to pour a water libation on the first day because there's no hint, so don't pour it on the 8th day either because there's no hint. And therefore, you're stuck with Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira having 6 days of water libation and not 7 days. And now, guess what? We're back to square one. We do not know who the author of a Mishnah that says pour water libation 7 days. Who could be the author of that Mishnah? Pour for 7 days doesn't fit anyone. We have Rabbi Yoshua 1 day. We have Rabbi Akiva 2 days. We have Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira now back to 6 days. Who is the author of that Mishnah that says 7 days of water libations? Ella Rabbi Yoshuahi. Rather, this is the opinion of Rabbi Yoshua. Nisoch hamayim kol shiva hilchas agmirila. This is the opinion of Rabbi Yoshua. The author of the Mishnah is Rabbi Yeshua. We now turn the page, if you have the art scroll, 3A2. Hilchasa Gemirila, that it's Nisach Hamayim is all 7 days, even though he says you mention water, you mention the you mention the Masha Baruch Mer Geshem, the rain, on the 8th day, but you do pour the Nisach HaMayim all 7 days. And the reason is because it's a Hilchas Gemirila, it's a tradition we have, and that's how we follow that it's 7 days of Nisuch HaMayim, according to Rabbi Yeshua. That's the way it is. It's not based, it doesn't have to do with the, with the mentioning of rain. In the Amar Rabbi Ami, because Rabbi Ami says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Ish Bikas Beis Horton, in the name of Rabbi Nechunya, the resident of the Bika, the valley of Beis Horton, that Eser Netiyos, there's a law about 10 saplings in a base saw, in a certain measurement of area, 2,500 square amos, which is maybe an amma is like either a foot and a half or 2 feet. So 2,500 square amos, that an area to sow a saw of barley. If you have 10 saplings planted in such an area, you would even be allowed to plow the field during the 30 days that are before the Shemitah year, which normally you're obligated to be moisif, to add on to the Shemitah year. But there's a halacha l'Moshe miSinai, a law given to Moses at Sinai, that you actually can plow such a land that the 10 saplings there needs to be plowing done for them to benefit them. And even during the 30 days before the Shemitah year, you would be allowed to plow the land. Arava, the law of the willow, that it's the law of the Hishanos, that they would use a certain ceremony in the Beis Hamikdash. That was also a halacha l'Moshe miSinai, a law given to Moses at Sinai. And this law that we are talking about, the Nisuch HaMayim, and the water libation, that it was a service that was done for 7 days. Each time they would pour in addition to the wine libation, they would pour a water libation. Halacha l'Moshe miSinai. This is a halacha given to Moses at Sinai orally. It's not written. It's halacha l'Moshe miSinai, and therefore, even though Rabbi Yeshua maintains that you mention rain on Shmini Atzeres, but the water, the pouring of the water was done all 7 days. It doesn't seem to fit. It doesn't have to fit, because the water libation was not based on the rain, mentioning rain. The water libation is based on a halacha l'Moshe miSinai. It's based on Hashem telling Moshe at Sinai orally to do this for 7 days. And with that, we're going to conclude. Sei gesund, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.